Welcome to Gray Associates Demand Trends monthly webinar series for community colleges, and thank you for joining us. We are discussing academic program evaluation for higher education. Each month, we share the latest trends and insights for academic program planning. We are pleased to have with us Bob Atkins, Gray's CEO, founder, and best-selling author. Allow me to share a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please place them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. We will try to get to as many of them as possible, and we can certainly follow up with you offline if we run out of time. You can also use our chat area for comments and discussion. After the webinar, we will be sending you a link to the slides and video recording. And without further ado, I will hand things off to Bob to get us started.
Thanks very much. Why don't we give it 30 more seconds or so for others to join, and then we'll really get officially underway. In the meantime, I'll do my little introduction. I am Bob Atkins, again, the founder here at Gray. Thank you very much for coming today. Much appreciate your time, and hope that you're geared up for a great holiday season. And somewhere west of this bomb cyclone that apparently is going to hit the East Coast as I try and make my way to New York. We'll see how that goes. So let's get started. We're going to talk about demand trends, and we're particularly going to talk about that for community colleges. Now, the first part of that that's very important is to evaluate programs. You need a program evaluation system. And Gray, I think, is the only firm that really offers a system that encompasses all the key ingredients of program evaluation. Today, we'll focus in on markets, in particular on what students want and what employers want, and how that's reflected in academic interest in academic programs for community colleges. But that's really not enough. You need to understand the economics of the program, what the revenue, cost, and margin is, what the academic standards and outcomes are for the program, and finally, to what degree is this program aligned with the mission of the institution. And when you're doing program evaluation, it's very much a team sport. You need to get administrators and faculty together. You need to run an efficient process so that they can make their voices heard and still reach conclusion in a reasonable amount of time. And typically, we recommend a workshop for that runs 2 days to run through the entire portfolio of programs at an institution. We do other things as well, just so you know. We do some pricing work. We do location analysis, both for where campuses should be, as well as where marketing money is best spent. We do financial planning models, so you can simulate out a pro forma 10-year financial forecast for an institution that reflects both macro factors like job growth and much more micro factors like return on endowment, if there is one, or minimum class size thresholds that you may set, and see how those play out over time. At the close of this, we'd like to be able to look at programs that are of interest to you, and we'll do that if we can. Now let's get into the data about student demand. And I will say in the community college sector, it's a fairly common error to really focus almost exclusively on what employers want when you're designing programs. And that would work really well if students wanted the same things that employers want. And sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. So it's easy to launch a program that may be of interest to employers and where they have hiring to do, and find out that no students are interested in taking that program. Had one school recently that launched an optics program, raised a bunch of money to do it, invested $500,000, and 5 students showed up. So you really do need information about what students want, not to the exclusion of employer interest. They're very important too. But if students aren't interested in taking a program, you'll find the return both to your employers and to the institution is pretty limited or even negative. Now, if you think about student demand, there are 3 kinds of indicators. There's an indicator of what's happened in the past, what sort of long-term trends are. That's iPads. And that's what people usually rely on. But it's not an indicator of the present. It's really the past, because the most recent data is from 2021. And in the community college sector, people have made their decision about what program to take 2-3 years before that. So we're really looking at data in iPads. That's what students wanted in 2018. And you'll see that when I dive into a particular program, how big the gap can be between what people wanted then and what people want today. So for current data, we look at enrollment, the American Student Clearinghouse data, to see what people actually enrolled in. I think the most current data set is spring of 2022, actually. So it's very, very current data. And then if you want to understand what students are likely to come looking for, I look at Google search, because that student's actively looking, but they're not actually going to enroll for another 6 or 12 months. So that gives us a window into what the students, if you will, of the future are likely to come to campus and take. All three are important, but do keep in mind if you're running, say, marketing right now, enrollment in Google search is probably where you want to spend your time, because that completions data is quite old. So you need all three in order to have a robust view of what has happened, what is happening, and what will happen. My apologies to Scrooge. So we do that when we keep track of Google search volume. And when you see these charts, you'll notice that the dark bars are 2021 data, and the lighter blue bars are 2022. So that's how to read it. We want to see, ideally, the light blue bars taller than the dark blue bars. That means volume is growing. And indeed it is. It's optimistic here, given the recent enrollment trends in community colleges. We've seen this data set up in terms of Google search volume since the beginning of the year, and most recently in November, it was up 16%. So again, that doesn't mean that enrollment's going to turn up this minute, but as I look down the pipe, there are more people interested in searching for these programs than there were a year ago. Now, what were they searching for? Well, cosmetology led the list, followed by commercial truck and bus driver. And we'll actually use commercial bus driver as our program of the week, so we can look at that in somewhat more depth. Then we see 4 healthcare programs: licensed practical vocational nursing, medical clinical assistant, nursing assistant, patient care aide, and EMT. So it is not uncommon to see healthcare leading the list. In this case, it is 4 out of our top 10. Then we see what I'll call other career and technical education. That you'll see through the presentation that terms, to me, a little amorphous. Does, for example, baking get included or not? But in that, we certainly this time have electrician, we have welders, and we have barbers. Now, what's growing fastest? Auto tech. And several of our trades programs here, we got 5 out of the top 10, what I would call technical trades programs. So auto tech, HVAC tech, aircraft maintenance tech, diesel mechanic tech, and electrician, all leading the growth in our top 10 of the 10 fastest growing programs. We do see some things in the beauty area as well: nail specialist, manicurist, barber, and I think there's a leftover. I meant to put that in trades, but bakery chef down here at the bottom, and a couple of healthcare here. Although you notice, since these programs tend to be so large, getting high percentage growth rates is more challenging. But we've got 55% growth in surge tech and 52% growth in diagnostic medical sonography or ultrasound tech. Now, if we want to think about how we attract students, often that's done through Google, buying pay-per-click advertising, and it can get very expensive. So here, the most expensive program was computer engineering technology technician. Now it's coming in at $58.12 per click. Now think about how many clicks you have to get in order to win an actual student. And as a rule of thumb, I use 100. It can vary widely around that number. But that $58, if you're only getting 1 in 100 of those clicks to convert into a student, is costing you $5,800 per student. So a bit of a caution there. Some of these are extremely expensive programs to play in if you want to be in a Google search game. But even if you're not, remember that that high price means these are extremely competitive. So even again, if you're not actually buying in Google, the amount people are willing to pay here will tell you how hard they're willing to compete to win those students. And here, what I would call 10 of the most competitive programs out there. Not too surprising. Again, computer engineering, medical billing and coding, sure. Computer software technician. And then we get to those 3 or 4 we saw before: airframe tech, mechanical tech, auto tech, diesel tech, and then engineering technology, general, medical health, and comtech. Now, there's some things that are less expensive, and these are the least expensive programs in terms of cost per click, which is also an indication of some of the least competitive programs. Another way to think about it is, if I wanted to go out and attract some new students, I could do that very inexpensively for keywords associated with these particular programs. So at the bottom of this list, which would be the more expensive end, we have polysomnography or sleep diagnostics. That's probably a tech for polysomnography at $3.53. Customer service, call center, $1.38, and so forth. So now we're looking at things where the cost to attract a student is more like $100 than $5,000. So it's a place that from a marketing perspective, if you have the course and you have some seats, might be worth spending some money on because the costs are relatively low. Now, amongst the highest course enrollment, and now we're stepping out of the community college sector per se, and looking at what courses people take, in particular oriented towards certificates. And that's often not from traditional education suppliers. So what we do here is we look at Coursera as an indicator. Coursera is a massively open online course provider, a MOOC, and we keep track of their volumes. And the highest historical volume has been for machine learning. And that is a bellwether. Most of these courses have historically been tech courses, but as you can see here, that's shifting. So machine learning was number one, but number two is now science of well-being, and it's been in that number two slot for quite some time. English for career development, I think probably international students. 38 million people have taken that program since its inception. Learning how to learn, 36 million people. Now get back into tech, neural networks, programming for everybody. Back to English with 18 million students. And for the first time, we have an introduction to food and health making the top 10 list. And finally, financial markets and COVID-19 tracking. And as I always say on this, or tracing, I'm looking forward to the day when we don't talk about COVID anymore, but can't seem to have put it completely behind us yet. But I am hoping that disease fades away. That remains to be seen in practice. The other part here, though, is to think about this in terms of your career and technical education on campus and your adult ed in particular. These are the kinds of things adults want to take. This is not traditional college students who are taking many of these subjects. And also, this is an entree potentially for even a community college to play in the international space. You could easily be teaching English for career development online and attracting an audience from well beyond the United States. Speak English professionally, same thing. So in looking at the list, there may be things you can cherry pick off this list that will be quite attractive, not just in the US, but around the world, if you can make them known. What's really hot here? Where's the enrollment going up? English for career development, number one. Science of well-being, number two. Learning how to learn in third, and so forth down the list until we get to psychology at the bottom in this case. And in here you can see quite a bit of tech in the middle of the list as well. Neural networks, UX design, data everywhere, and programming for everybody. So tech remains pretty strong, but it is interesting to see how other much less technical areas are now top of the list. Udemy is quite a different platform. And here we're going to see tech almost exclusively. But there are a few outliers. And one of the things I found interesting was this language learning. Again, remembering that a great deal of that's going to be people learning English as a second language. But inside that, when we've looked at it, there's Chinese and Korean and other languages that are quite important. And as I think about this, it's been a declining area in public education and college for years, as US students seem to be less and less interested. But the truth may be that they're not interested in these things as a major. They may be interested in them as a minor or just some courses because they want to have that exposure to a foreign language. It is also true, I think, that many of the people who are taking the courses you see here are actually adult learners. So they're outside of the traditional education system, learning a language because they want to, or learning a language because they have to for their career. So it doesn't fit the sort of traditional 2 or 4 year model. It may be what you need to be doing online or in the nights and evenings when adults can come in and take these courses. So let's shift over and look at what's currently happening in terms of enrollment. Top of our list in overall enrollment is welding. Good profession, middle income kinds of earnings in the $50,000 range. So interesting that that's topping the list these days. We have business administration, not surprising, in number 2. Then what used to be a very large program is beginning to come back recently as medical clinical assistant. Then we see nursing assistant, healthcare aide, and then two other health programs on this list: licensed practical nurse and EMT paramedic. And then we have a couple that are more technically oriented: auto mechanic tech, HVAC tech, and we grouped cosmetology here, probably better in health and beauty, but in technical in its own way, I suppose. So that's the top of the list here. Pretty heavy emphasis on healthcare, and then on technology, 3 out of the 4 top jobs, or excuse me, top programs. What's growing fastest? Interestingly, commercial truck and bus driver. And before we get too excited about this, well worth watching last week tonight with Oliver and just lambaste the trucking industry. And you'll see later on in our data that some of what he says is absolutely true. And I'll come back to that, but still very popular. And importantly, we still have a shortage of truck drivers. So just we don't want to pay them very much, as we'll see. Second is electrician. Then we have auto tech and two other techs, welding tech and carpenter. So in that career and technical education space. Then we have some info tech, both in the info tech literally and computer sciences, and then a variety of other things, real estate, cosmetology, and early childhood education, all growing well above average. So as we look at the associate level, moving up now from tech to associate, or certificate to associate, business is leading with a little under half the volume. We have registered nursing, but still very healthy volume, 40,000 students enrolled in that program, new enrollments in spring. Psychology, 27,000, biology, computer science, and so forth, with CJ hitting this list twice, once under police science and once under justice and corrections. Now keep an eye on this accounting tech bookkeeping too. Very heavy enrollment here. When we look at jobs, it links well into some hot job fields. Among the associates program, the fastest growing program was electrician. And we can see a bunch of other hands-on technical kinds of things here. Welder, culinary arts training, history. Let me skip over that when I was being technical. Cybersecurity, auto mechanics, all and excuse me, engineering tech, all making our list of relatively fast growing associates programs. And we have a couple of others, the visual arts and arts and studies general. Now let's look backwards, and it's interesting to see how what iPads is saying about what happened differs from what Google says is going to happen and what the National Student Clearinghouse says what is happening. So if you will, now we're going into the ghost of Christmas past. So historically speaking, the highest completion program is medical clinical assistant, followed by cosmetology. You'll notice none of our higher end data science, data security, that kind of thing makes the list. And even things like auto tech are not, just make the list at the bottom instead of the top. So very different order, in many cases, different programs that were high volume than are high volume at the moment. As we look at customer service support in terms of fast growth, remember they had the lowest cost per acquisition, but it's one of the fastest growing programs, if not the fastest growing program in this period, up 23% in terms of completions. Cybersecurity, number 2 slot, operations management, IT, and then a couple of things that I would put in that beauty or spa area, as esthetician, facial treatment, and master esthetician, a little bit further down the list. And then interesting, GIS, geographic information science and cartography, up 15%, CNC machinist up 13%, and HR up 12%. This GIS, I suspect what we're seeing in here is a lot of interest in drones and some of the work that can be done with drones. Registered nursing, in terms of overall completion volume, had the highest number of completions at the associate level, not a surprise, followed fairly closely by business administration and management. And then we get into really that, what I would call very diverse group of things that students are interested in who are probably going to transfer out later on. We have bio, people probably thinking about pre-med in many cases there, criminal justice, psychology, social sciences, bookkeeping, computer science, and keep that bookkeeping in mind. There are, again, some interesting jobs out there, health services and early childhood education and teaching. What's growing fastest? Generally speaking, these are the more liberal arts programs, just intrinsically, partly from what's being taught at the associate's level. Economics, I'll jump down a little bit, sociology, political science, physics, psychology, biology, and Spanish language and literature. Again, those are sort of the eclectic ones. The more career-oriented ones We see health services and allied health, cyber security, very fast growing, by the way, at the bachelor's level. And then kinesiology, and it's really it for career-oriented ones. You can pick up biology in the sense that those folks may be interested in pre-med. Now let's shift gears and look at what jobs there are out there. So we got a sense of what students want. Now we got to take a look at what employers want. And ultimately, we talk about the program of the month, look at how you can join those two and understand overall what programs may be most attractive when you combine both student interest and employer needs. Job postings, probably not any news here in the sense that you may have read in the papers that the feds have tightened interest rates, and that's leading to a slowdown in the job market and potentially a recession coming up next year. We'll see if that actually transpires, but we are seeing a drop in the job market. Now, previously we kept 2020 on here, and we'll probably actually restore that next month. We had such a spike in jobs in 2021 as we bounced back from the recession that took place because of COVID in 2020. So we see this rush of job postings, and what's really happening as much as anything right now is the number of job postings is subsiding to more normal levels. And if we had 2020 here, you could begin to see that, although the tail end of 2020 is also, the November would be clouded by COVID. So looking at the last 3 years is difficult to really pick out what the underlying patterns are that aren't all effectively a reaction to the epidemic. But my hypothesis would be that this is getting back down to normal levels. If it continues to decline, and you can see it's been a 5-month decline now, 4-month decline, we'll go through what I would call normal levels into what might be more recessionary numbers. But the job market isn't actually bad yet. It's just not as good as it used to be. Now, I mentioned those things for accountants. Well, here they are. Tax preparers, #1 in job postings. Now, some of you may say, and not without cause, well, that's just because we've got tax season coming up. But actually, this has been our top category for employment now for 3 or 4 months. So well preceding tax season. I think what's happening is we have a combination of the feds actually needing tax auditors. They're hiring 86,000 new people in the IRS. Look out for all the rest of us who are going to have to deal with audits. But tax preparers is way up on this list. And we are also coming into the season when huge volumes of those are hired by people like H&R Block. Registered nurses, managers, other customer service reps, sales reps, nursing assistants, general operations managers, maintenance workers, medical assistants, and executive secretaries. So we do see a little bit of an overweight for health here, registered nurses, nursing assistants, and medical assistants. But I look at this and say, this feels a lot like across the board growth, economic growth, rather than something that's focused in a particular area. And in terms of growth, there are tax preparers, again, top of the list in terms of overall growth in units. But we also see tax examiners and collectors on the list now. So tax has taken 2 of our top 3 slots in terms of job growth. And then again, it gets very eclectic: security guards, pharmacy aides, training development specialists, food services managers, first line supervisors, advisors of correctional officers, airfield and operations, administrative support. Very eclectic group of things. But down here, a little bit of an uptick in bus and truck and diesel specialists month over month. And we'll come again, we're going to take a look at that in more depth in just a second. Now that brings us to program of the month. So without further ado, let's take a look. We're going to do truck and bus, and we're going to look specifically at the market for that program. So we're not going to be able to look at margins in this case. Obviously, we don't know the school. We won't comment on academic standards that may be more appropriate for one school than another, or mission, where it's going to vary from institution to institution. But we will be looking at it from the perspective of what I would call a fairly generic community college, where there's a really heavy focus on employment, and we would argue a need to bring that into balance with student demand as well. So this chart essentially does that. What we're looking at here is ranking of some 1,400 programs that we keep track of, and we score on 50 variables. Several of them are in student demand, and in this case, student demand is at the 98th percentile. Competitive intensity is relatively benign, so it's 95th percentile in that score. And the employment percentile is good at the 79th percentile. So it's actually doing pretty well across the board for this particular program. Others you can see are more binary. It's the business administration, very good on student demand, very good on employment, but heavily competitive. So, and we're going to keep degree fit out of this. It's all, we've filtered already for things that are more in the associate and certificate space. And whenever we're doing this generic, a generic presentation, we don't really know what kind of degree you're looking for. So we'll neutralize that, if you will, so that we're not over favoring, say, things that are certificate versus associate or associate versus bachelor. So on into our system. So a couple things to keep in mind here. We do percentile things. Well, you might ask yourself, percent of what? Well, it's a percent of 1,400 to 1,500 programs that we keep track of in our systems. So something that's a 98th percentile higher is one of the 30 most attractive programs on that particular metric. As you go from green to red, things are getting worse. So by the time you get down to pink here, we're at the 40th percentile or lower on a given metric, or for that matter, in an overall category where we're showing that. So green is good, red is bad. That's true for all the data we're about to look at. So when we look at student demand, the overall volumes are extremely good. We can see Google search at the 99th percentile, on-ground completions at the 98th percentile, new student enrollment, a little bit lagging there, 94th percentile, and not surprisingly, no international page views for this. And so as we look at the sum of on-ground and online, we're at the 98th percentile. Notice reassuringly that there are no online completions for truck driver. While I argue that simulators would be extremely effective here, as far as I know, simulation training is not really recognized in many of the states in terms of driver licensing. So personally, I think it'd be great. I'd like to see somebody drive a real truck too as part of this, but I don't want them to practice driving a real truck on an icy highway. And that's something you can do with a simulator. So I think, honestly, the industry and in particular the regulators are 5 to 10 years behind on this, and we could give students more hours and simulate more challenging conditions if we use simulation than if we didn't. I mean, after all, it's good enough for the Air Force to teach somebody how to fly an F-16, but we're not going to let somebody learn on a simulator for a truck, which would be much simpler to provide, and they do exist out there, have for 5 or 10 years. So anyway, I think there's an opportunity there, but you got to get synced up with your local DMV in order to make sure the work that's done on a simulator is given credit when they get when you're trying to get your folks' driver's licenses. Moving down, year-over-year change. This is an interesting case of past, present, and future. So in the past, completion volumes were declining, down 1,900 or 11%. In the present, however, new student enrollment is actually up 349. That's 39% growth. In terms of unit volume, it's the 99th percentile. In terms of percent volume, it's the 84th percentile. So right now it's growing. Then we look and say, well, what's likely to happen in the future? Is it going to go back to a decline, or is it going to do something else? Actually, it looks as though it's going to accelerate. Google is up by 342,000 searches, and it's 51% year-over-year growth. So if anything, I think we're going to see an increasing number of students interested in taking these trucking programs. Now, I will do my unpaid commercial announcement, actually. I've always been intrigued by this program. I think it's one of those few things where there's a relatively short path to getting a job. We'll come to some of the issues with that. And there's a school that I know where if you're interested in launching a CDL program, they'll actually set that whole program up for you. They're sort of an online program manager, but for trucking programs. So keep that in mind. If capital's an issue, or if it just is one of those things you're not going to get to because you're busy, there are other people that can eventually set it up for you if you want to do that. By the way, that paid commercial allowance I mentioned is unpaid. Gray has no interest in that business, no financial interest in that business. It's just a client we've known for a long time, and they're good people. So if you're interested, I'll be glad to put you in touch. Let's see. Now we get to the problem. There are good wages, a large number of jobs here. What we're looking at is over 400,000 job postings, 4.2 million people employed. And here, job postings and BLS job openings are fairly close. You can see BLS, they'd run a survey to ask how many jobs do you have available of a given type. Very similar to job postings this particular month, 460,000 of those out there. So that's a lot. That's 99th percentile in all three of those metrics. Then we have, when we're doing this for 4 year, we'll keep track of job postings for people who don't end up in the field for which you'd think they were prepared. That's not something we do at the associate and trades level, because the data source we use doesn't track at that degree level. We will be adding that capability in the next 3 to 6 months. We found a source where we can keep track of what some 140 million people do in the US, what undergraduate degrees they have, and how much are getting paid. So I should be able to fill in those blanks with the kinds of jobs that somebody would do if they had taken this program, but then not necessarily gone into the field for which they're prepared. So imagine somebody who took accounting who ends up in, being a CEO, for example, or my favorite example is a history major who goes on to do almost anything but history, as it turns out, normally. Then we can see the growth rates. 1 year historical growth actually down 5%. 3 years is flat, and then with the BLS forecast of 0.4%. Now, I know many of you count on that BLS forecast for program investments. I will tell you to be super careful, not a very good forecast. 80% of the BLS forecasts are off by 50% or more. BLS, in terms of ability to correctly predict whether a program is going to grow or shrink, gets it right 62% of the time. A coin toss would get it right 50% of the time. So you're not really getting a big improvement, even on a basic metric like will this grow or not. Now, you might say, well, can you do better? I would say no. We're going to work on some ways of looking at this more effectively and trying to give you a better sense of which areas are probably going to grow and how uncertain that is. But the fundamental problem is it's very difficult to forecast the future of the US economy. If anybody could do that well, they'd probably be retired and living a grand life in some tropical island. It's just extremely difficult. There's a lot of unforeseen events, and there's a lot of chaotic interactions amongst economic variables that make this unlikely to be a very accurate forecast, no matter who does it. Now, the next question is, okay, right now, do we have enough graduates to fill the jobs? And the answer is a resounding no in trucking. 27 jobs per graduate of a CDL program. BLS job openings, 30. So for every person graduating, there are 27 to 30 jobs available. Which leads us to the next number and makes that job opening gap not surprising, because folks want to hire people, but they don't actually want to pay them. So you can see the 10th percentile wage here is $24,000. That's, not a whole lot above minimum wage. And the mean wage is $36,000, $37,000, which is the 5th percentile wage in the United States. So from a compensation standpoint, it's not a very attractive field at all, but it is a place to get a start. And I think it's a relatively short program, 2-3 months to get a certificate, and you can be back out and working again. And what I would be talking to those folks about is, get back out on the road, and you can have a lot of time sitting at rest stops and so forth to earn a more advanced degree and be able to move up in terms of pay. And of course, my message to trucking companies would be, if you paid people, you might be able to attract the drivers you need and maybe even keep them. So again, if you want to have some fun, watch the John Oliver slot that was about truck driving, ran a couple weeks ago on his, what is it called, Last Week Tonight. And you get some very specific stories about what it's like to be a truck driver. Now, as we look at what's happening year over year in terms of employment trends, we're down 5% in October, down again a little bit in November. What kinds of truck drivers are people looking for? Well, it turns out auto parts delivery is leading the list. So some of these cars are breaking down out there. You have driver, helper, bus driver, FedEx, and so forth down the list. And in terms of highest volume by occupation, light truck drivers. Now, careful here, because this may not even require a CDL. Many kinds of light truck can be driven with a regular driver's license. Certainly not, though, in heavy-duty tractor trailer, and then a mixed bag as far as these others in terms of what kind of license might be required. Now, switching gears a little bit, let's talk about competition. Pretty competitive program, 95th percentile in terms of competition. And remember that a high score on competition is not a good thing. So you see these are pink in this case because the coloring is reversed. 205 institutions teaching this. Interestingly, 4 added to the market last year. And I'm going to keep going down. How big are these programs? Important indicator of whether that you'd be able to offer them and earn a return on the investment you might have to make to build these programs. 74 average completions, but median is still 37. So it's a pretty healthy number of students in a class, but it's a little bit different than completions normally. Normally, there are more students than there are completes because you got, say for a 2-year degree, you're going to have 2 years worth of folks in the system before they can graduate. And then others, because people don't really graduate in 2 years, often they graduate in 3, and there's attrition as well. So in those cases, I would multiply the number of completions by, say, 3, maybe even 4 to estimate the number of students. But here, the number of completions and the number of students is going to be pretty close to the same thing. And you're really only talking about a 3-month program. So 37 is a good number. It's not a fabulous number. It's only 12 per cohort. The concerning thing, though, is it's going down. So that median program size has gone from 43 to 37, down by 6 or 14%. Then we look at Google cost per click, and it's not terrible, but it's not great. We're at the 62nd percentile in terms of cost. The competition index is fine. It's at average 49%, 49th percentile. And that index you see here at a 0.38 works on a 0 to 1 scale, with 1 being most competitive. So we're well below the midpoint of that in terms of the actual scale itself, which amongst our programs is the 49th percentile. Now, what's going on in terms of completion volume over time? It was going down pretty rapidly, as I mentioned. 2019 to 2020, it was down 15%, but that reversed to 2020 to 21 with the most recent IPEDS data, actually up 10% year over year. So a little bit of an uptick in this in terms of student volumes. What degree level is required for this? Pretty straightforward. This is a certificate, and almost all the completions in this case were at the certificate level, and almost everybody employed in the marketplace is no college or some college. Now, there are a few folks who have higher level degrees, but obviously these aren't in truck driving. These are people who got their degrees in something else and decided for whatever reason that they were going to drive trucks for a while. And finally, we put it all together on one page for you, so you can have a look and see all these factors in one place when you're trying to make a program decision. And use those colors. You can see that overall is green. I can see my student demand numbers are almost all green. And we talked about why there are a couple of pinks there as the as the trend changed from negative in the completions data to positive in enrollment, and even more positive in Google. I can see it's very large at a glance. It's all green. Then I get down here to wages, and I've got 2 flashing reds that would concern me. And I've got some concerns over here in terms of level of competition. This, however, is very local because you can't do this online. So the degree to which there's competition nationally, which is what the market we happen to be looking at, the answer could be quite different if we were looking at a given local market where this program may or may not be widely offered. Let's summarize. In November, US Google searches for community college academic programs increased 16% year over year. So there may be light on the horizon here. I hope for community colleges. We've had a lot of tough years in terms of enrollment growth. I think there's a chance here that things are going to begin to turn around for you. Commercial bus and truck driver was the fastest growing certificate. At the associate level, electrician grew fastest, and 2 arts programs made it in the 10 fastest growing associate programs for enrollment. Next thought, and I don't see a lot of this being taught at community colleges or even elsewhere, tax is a boom right now. I don't know how long that'll continue, but I suspect once we put 86,000 auditors in place at the IRS, there's going to be a need for a lot of tax support below that. And as it happens, Gray is looking for tax help. This year, we had to change accountants, and it is actually hard to find an accounting firm. Many of them are not really accepting new clients. Some folks are retiring from that industry. So I think that whole tax and accounting area is actually going to be very strong from an employment standpoint for the foreseeable future. Demand for commercial truck drivers, bus drivers, as we talked about, is strong. Student demand's healthy. Employers need folks like that. The median program sizes are decent, though declining, but mean wages are only in the 5th percentile. So this is either a job you go to, but as you are temporarily between jobs. Perhaps if you're older, you end up here. But maybe it's a stepping stone to get started in your career while you learn other things or figure out what you really want to do. But the wages aren't such that you'd want to have this really as a career in and of itself. Now, I will say there are niches within truck driving where that's not as true, but on average, it's a very low paid field. That's what we have for you today. I hope you'll join us. We have several more webcasts coming up. We have one on the 25th of January. Again, our monthly webcast. We'll be doing one on bachelor's degrees, especially if any of you are thinking of going into that space, would be interesting. January 26th at 2. And perhaps most important, we have our most popular webinar of the year, which is our 5 emerging programs to watch. So these are programs that are too new to be in iPads. You're not going to find them well represented in BLS because literally the tracking codes are not even there for some of these programs yet. But we look at other indicators. We look at what venture capitalists are investing in and what we're seeing in some of the emerging news sources about new concepts and programs. And we extract from that what we think are programs to watch. Now, we've had some pretty good luck with this over time. Just my favorite, about 6 or 7 years ago, we began to talk to our clients about data science. If we got no other prediction right, that would have been worth the ticket of admission. So we have gotten a number of others that turned out to be quite important. Esports is another one we started to talk about, gosh, probably 4 years ago now. So there's some very significant things that you can spot early. But I will say that anytime you're talking about emerging, the risk that it simply will fail to emerge or whatever, it'll emerge later, is high. So these are things you want to do with money that you can afford to put at risk. And which one of these are interesting for you, you'll have to wait and watch the webinar and see. So that's January 12th at 2 p.m., 5 emerging programs to watch webinar. Without further ado, let me stop. If there are programs that any of you would like to have a look at, go ahead and post them in the chat. And we'd be glad to, I'll turn the screen over to Winnell, and he'll take a look at them for you.
Bob, I would love to turn my camera on, but it says the host has stopped it. Anyway,
Hold on.
Let me take care of that for you.
Your
Your screen share will work. So feel free to get started.
Okay. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yep. Just not your smiling face.
Or my Santa hat. It's all good though. Yeah, I was trying to get everybody in the festive spirit here. I see behavioral health tech. Not sure what the zip code there is, but
Winnell, try your camera now.
let's see. There we go. Nice. All right, behavioral health tech. Do we know the zip code for this by any chance? Bob, I can Google it.
I think you want to go to probably health. There may not be a zip code. That's not one I remember hearing about before.
Yeah, it sounds like a one size fit all type of, there could be many different ones.
Probably a health tech is probably a place to start, see if that helps.
It's a lot of different ones here. So maybe behavioral.
Huh.
5122. Let me see what 5122 says. Public health.
Yeah.
51.
Well, let's go ahead and list all your 51s. Might be a place to start, and let's see if we can find something close to that.
Something in the 51s that has tech in it.
Yeah. It could be that patient care aid is a flavor of that. Rad tech, medical sonography, pharmacy.
Not sure we're going to be able to find an exact zip code for this one.
Might be under psych.
So,
So we have another clue. It says specific to mental behavioral health.
all right, that might help a little bit better. A mental health counselor.
We tried behavioral already. Yeah, I don't think behavioral is going to find it. See what happens if we just scan down tech, if we can find anything close. Technician, I think, is what you want. You just go ahead and hit yes for all of them. We'll scan down that list.
Let's see what we got here.
Well, I do see a zip
Psychiatric mental
code.
health services technician, 51-1502.
Son?
Got it.
Okay, I also see 151.2212 for psychiatric mental health technician.
Yeah, that's this. Same thing.
You said it was 51.22.
No, I think we got it.
Okay,
Doing 1502.
cool. Let's jump right into the scorecard here.
So looking at the shading here, it looks like it's about average on some of the metrics. Interested to see what the problem is on employment that's turned that pink. So we're not getting any Google search volume. Now, when it says NA, that means it's a program that we're not tracking volume for. So don't interpret the blank as having any meaning. It's just we tracked 900 programs and out of about 1,500, so this just didn't make the cut in terms of size. Far away, Winell.
Yeah, so we're seeing some pretty steady, above 80th percentile numbers here for student enrollment, on ground, online, and some of on ground completions. These are the size metrics related to student demand. Some things that I would highlight here is, the employment is in the pink. And what's driving kind of this lower score and this lower percentile are going to be the wages between 30 and 60 here. 69,000. This is going to be a 19th percentile wage.
Hey, Winell, what scoring method are we using?
This is going to be on the all scoring. So
yeah, let's be a little bit fair and do it on associates instead.
Okay.
Because that 69,000 is actually not a bad wage for an associate level, associate only degree. So we'll, as you can see, we had a half a dozen scoring templates. And so we're going to switch over to one that is, oh gosh, now we got to find it again. Psychiatric is the where to start. It's 15.
There we go. So now what we did is we kind of selected a scoring rubric that's going to give us a more, a cleaner comparative analysis to programs that make sense for kind of direct to workforce focus. So we're going to award points a little differently where appropriate. And when we do that, we're going to see that this program now is at the 85th percentile comparative to all other programs like it. And now we're going to see that in the employment, we're still seeing kind of that same narrative, but where the negative is really striking is going to be in the direct prep wages. For something like 10th percentile wages, which we use as a proxy for entry level wages, $28,000 is actually resulting in a -10.
Yeah, and the reason for that is it is really difficult to recover any student loan payments and so forth if you're only getting paid $28,000 a year these days. So we hit that with a pretty big negative score, and we see a program where the 10th percentile wages are below 30. There's some bright spots here though too. The 1-year growth,
Yep.
14%. The 3-year growth, 6%. Far away.
And we're also looking at some strong just job posting total numbers as well. So we are seeing a lot of job postings in the market. And we're also seeing a lot of current employment. So this is a field that does have a lot of people currently working, as reported to BLS, with 89,000 folks working in this field, or 90,000 here, an 83rd percentile value. And then if we look at the competition, some promising things as well as, the average completion volume is 33. So this is a relatively large program across many institutions, or at least when we look at the median, we'll see that there might be a couple players that are really big, and then everyone else is kind of trying to match that energy here as well. 67 campuses with graduates. That's an 87th percentile value there. So relatively competitive market here. 3 campuses left the market year over year. Median program size. Go ahead.
A little bit of online starting up as well. Wouldn't have been one of the first ones I've thought of, but that's actually pretty interesting. You might be able to do. I've seen this with some of the other health programs where, at a minimum, you can do a big chunk of your studies online and then potentially come in for an on-campus week or two to get some of your clinical skills covered.
Mm-hmm. We're going to see 36% of completions at the certificate level, 47% of completions associate, and then 16% bachelor's level completions for the zip code here.
Jordan, I think you're next up, so don't abandon hope. So should we shift over? There was a request for speech language pathologist.
Yep.
Overall, that's an interesting program, is what I would say. And
the assistant or the actual? Oh yeah, it is assistant.
Yeah.
So, nice.
Not looking so good. And again, part of the reason we color code is it allows you to take a look and see very quickly what the overall gestalt is, if you will, for a program. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't look at it more depth, but it'll tell you, at a glance, whether this program is likely to be good or poor. And let you walk through it in more depth. Well,
yeah, and some things that I'll highlight immediately are, the size of this program here in terms of completion looks to be pretty small here, with median program completions at 8. There's 24 campuses. This is a national market, right? So we are looking across the nation. Wages are very low here at the 10th percentile. We're not seeing, 76 job posting totals nationally is critically low. We see that here in the 18th percentile in pink. And even completion volume.
I sometimes want to check in healthcare, and it's not going to be an issue here, but I look at job openings too, because you get big healthcare systems and they might post, one job for a nurse when they actually have 10 people they need to hire for that nursing position. So it's worthwhile to, kind of look at postings and openings, together to see if this is one of those categories where people, if you will, underpost. That's not the case here, actually. There are more job postings than there are job openings, which is not very encouraging. And only 357 people show as employed in this field. So not a lot of people in the country. And,
I don't know. In this case, I guess this is more of just something to consider in terms of just the zip code reporting. I don't know if there's any overlap with, the assistant zip code and, the speech language pathology zip code. But if I was working with a client here, it might make sense to just look at both of the zip codes. I know the intentions are different. But there could just be, maybe some insights that we can gather from the other program. And of course, actually, never mind. I learn something new every day. This is a 100% doctoral program. So I would imagine there's no overlap in this case at all.
But the results are similar, interestingly enough. Just a small field. By the way, it's not
we're also an associate
at all to say it's not important.
We're in associates and below right now, Bob. So
yeah.
keep in mind, that's why we're looking at competitive intensity at 0 right now.
Right. Good point. Keep me honest.
So keep in mind, it's not that this program doesn't exist. It's that the focus of our analysis right now is set for associates and below, which is why you're going to see some zeros under enrollment and completions and campuses with graduates. And this is the power of having something like the degree fit here in the scorecard. You know, before we say, oh my gosh, this program doesn't exist, you know, we can see that the reason the data is filtered is because 100% of the completion data is actually at the doctorate level. So we would have to shift the focus into a doctoral rubric here to capture some of that data into the scorecard, which is what's going on here. Any other programs out there? And again, just because all of the questions were under health sciences, you know, one use case of the system is knowing the programs that you want to look at. The other use case of the system is letting the data guide you into a specific area or a set of programs. Just because we've really been diving into the 51s, I'm going to go ahead and come back in here and filter by that 2-digit family of 51s, health professions, in the scope of associates and below. And then we can kind of let the market data rank here in this program rank. And, you know, if there are any zip codes that are intriguing to you all, you know, I'm happy to go ahead and click into one of those. I know we still have 3 minutes here. I'll leave this open for a little bit. I'm going to pause my share here in the screen. I'm going to do something cool while we wait. Cool. And then, you know, another way that we could help, you know, use the data to guide us would be, well, first of all, I'm filtered in here on the 51s and associates and below. And, you know, we're seeing a pretty steady decline year over year in overall completions since 2015. But I'm going to go ahead and break down all this data at the 4-digit level here. And we can actually use the completion trends, whether it's a year or 5-year, to maybe try to identify a pocket that might be growing despite the steady decline.
I think what you're seeing in the decline, if you sort on 5-year CAGR,
Yep.
Or maybe sort on 5-year units, if you want to add that, I believe we had a long decline in medical clinical assistants, and there was a huge field. So when that declines, it drags down the entire category. Yeah, you see medical assisting services down 45,000. Medical clinical assistant down 32,000. You know, some of those big and nursing aid, you know, there's some big programs that declined precipitously for a while. That went from 80,000 to 52,000. And by the way, at one point it had 240,000 completions a year. So my hypothesis would be that, you know, there's 1 or 2 programs that are dragging down this entire sector. Although I don't see growth in any of these areas right now.
Well, I'm filtered on decline, so we might want to go from high to low here.
Well, you know, the other thing though to remember is we're also looking at 2020.
Yeah.
And we should be updating to 2021 momentarily, but that's going to have a huge hit in all these things because of COVID.
I would say this health services, allied health, you know, is probably an area that's seeing an increasing trend line for some reason. I'd be curious to see what the 2021 data looks like here. There's something going on here. Not familiar with this field though. I'm not sure what this is.
And Jordan, the recording will be available in a day or 2. So you're welcome to grab it and play it with your friends. And if you'd like one of us to join the conversation at some point, just let us know. So I think that's our time. Thank you all for joining us. If there are any questions left, just feel free to ask. We're happy to stay for a couple more minutes. But if not, I just encourage all of you to join us in January when we'll be doing our 5 emerging programs. You can see what the newest things are to think about out there.